Hi everybody, my name's Steve Isherwood. I'm Chief Executive of the ISE and welcome to our webinar. This is the second webinar that we're doing on virtual careers fairs, and this is all about how you can make virtual careers fairs work for yourself. We did one last week that was very much from the university's perspective. This webinar is both from the employer and the vendor perspective, and I've got a great sort of panelists lined up who will introduce you to shortly. If you haven't logged on to an ISE webinar before, as attendees, because we do get an awful lot of attendees on these webinars, we do have you all on mute, but we really encourage you to ask questions of the panel, and they're all geared up to answer anything that you may have. You'll find a questions dialogue box on the platform that we're using, so please pop your questions into there and I'll keep an eye on those as we go along and either feed them into the conversation as it's running, or I'll save some time at the end and we'll cover off the questions then. This webinar is being recorded. You will get a link to it. It normally comes out a bit later this afternoon, so you can go back and revisit it, if there's anything that you missed that you want to recap on. But also please feel free to share the link. Throughout this crisis, we made a decision to make our webinars and our podcasts open to all in the interest of collaboration and just sort of helping our industry work better together. So please feel free to share that link if you think there are others that will be able to make use of it. Okay, that's enough from me. I think it's time to crack on and I'll introduce our panel. So I'll go around the panel as I see them in my screen. So Joanne, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Absolutely. So hello, I'm Joanne McEvoy and I am Project Manager of Innovation Programmes in InterTradeIreland. I manage the Career Boost programme. The Career Boost programme connects science, engineering and technology graduates with real innovative project management jobs across the island of Ireland. So currently we have live jobs up on our website that allow students to go into and see if they meet the criteria to join these different companies across the island.
Thanks, Joanne. And do you want to brag about the award that you won last week? I think you have to get that in.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for giving us the opportunity for that. Absolutely. So we are a client of Grad Ireland. I'm delighted to say that Gavin made a surprise visit to my colleague Janet Toole's house last week and awarded us. We won the award for Graduate Employer of the Year 2019. So it was lovely and we're still on a high celebrating from that.
Fantastic. And that's a feed into yourself, Gavin. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, okay. Well, firstly, good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Gavan O'Brien is my name, and I'm the Managing Director of Grad Ireland in Ireland. So Grad Ireland is actually part of Group GTI, which many of you will be familiar with in the UK in the form of Target Jobs and Target Connect, and also our Target Awards that many of you, I'm sure, would have attended in the past. In Ireland, we have three main channels as part of our business, which are our annual print titles, our website, which is gradireland.com, and also events. We hold a lot of events during the course of the year, so we're keen to share our experience with you all today, and also a thank you to Stephen for the invitation to take part.
That's okay. And if anybody's wondering why we've got sort of Grad Ireland on this, is very much obviously we work very closely right across with Group GTI, and also as you've actually run virtual events already, we thought it'd be great to get some of that experience out there. So actually some practice from stuff that's already happened. Obviously we'll be doing a lot more of this come the autumn, so it's good to get some understanding of practical experience, I think, from people that have been doing this stuff already. So that's great. Thank you both for dialing in from Ireland. It's not quite the same as flying over, is it? But it's good to have you on the webinar. Gemma, would you like to go next?
Yeah, bro, thank you. So hi everyone, my name's Gemma Barnes. I'm the Graduate Recruitment Manager at White & Case. So we're a commercial law firm. We recruit sort of up to 50 trainees a year, and we do our recruitment primarily through vacation schemes, but we also run sort of lots of open days, lots of other events, which obviously used to be more physically run. So now over the past sort of couple of months and over the next few months, we're sort of really looking at these slightly more creative ways and sort of really embracing the virtual platforms that are on offer.
Thank you very much, Gemma. And by no means least, Alex.
Hi, I'm Alex Aldridge. I'm the founder and managing director of Legal Cheek. We're the most read legal website in the UK, and our core audience is undergraduate students, and we work with law firms in lots of different ways to help them reach students. one of which is virtual events, which has been a really busy area for us since the outbreak of the pandemic, and we've got a very busy autumn coming up of lots of different types of virtual events.
Fantastic, thanks Alex. Great. So as I said at the start, we've got a great panel lined up this morning. I'm sure we're going to get lots of really good insights. And of course, if you'd like to ask questions, as I said, please populate that dialog box. And one of the reasons that we're focusing on this area is, of course, you know, the impact of coronavirus, very much people looking now at the autumn season. And as some of our panelists have already alluded to, you know, this idea that a lot of it is going to be much more virtual, of course, than it will have been in the past. And as an organisation, one of the things that we are, I guess, a little bit worried about is that actually, with there being so much moving online, we're in a little bit uncharted territory, that actually we could end up in a situation where there's, you know, sort of millions of platforms, universities doing their own things, people like yourselves, Legal Cheek, Grad Ireland, and as well as employers putting people onto their own platforms, that actually we might end up in a situation where student audience is spread very thin, and also employers don't quite know where students are, and it all ends up a bit of a mix. So part of the reason for us doing this is just to encourage collaboration, encourage understanding, so that actually we do all have a much smoother autumn. So bearing that in mind, if I can turn to you first of all, Gemma, I was just wondering sort of what challenges are you facing with the autumn recruitment season? You know, it's only really a couple of months away. It'll be here before we know it.
That's it, and I think it is so crazy how time is just going so quickly, even though sort of we're all working remotely and in these virtual settings. But no, we're definitely sort of thinking about the upcoming few months and the different challenges that we're going to face. And I mean, historically, as everyone knows, that sort of key milk round recruitment season is based around physical events. It's physical careers fairs, we run dinners, skills sessions, all sorts of different networking events. So something that we're really spending time carefully thinking about is the challenge of moving those onto sort of more virtual platforms. And so many brilliant different platforms out there, but things we need to make sure that we're still able to offer in our engagement efforts are things like making sure that we can allow prospective candidates to really get a feel of the culture of the firm, get a solid understanding of the different opportunities that we have on offer. And it's always sort of challenging trying to get that across in a physical environment anyway, when you're sort of traveling the different law fairs, sort of answering lots of different questions from so many different students. So we're sort of really thinking carefully about how we can ensure that that's not missed out on these virtual platforms as well. And I think one thing that's really brilliant, and we're sort of able to reach a lot more students on these virtual platforms, because when you're sort of physically traveling around the country, you're restricted, you haven't got as much time because you're sitting on trains, traveling up to different fairs. But one thing that's going to be really sort of useful during this virtual environment is that breadth of different universities that we can really reach out to and sort of work with different students on. So that's something that's going to be sort of quite exciting in the next few months. But I think the main thing is we're sort of really being creative in our thought processes, and everyone's quite familiar now in using virtual platforms. So we're sort of excited about what's going to come over the next few months.
So just a bit of context from what you're saying, are you still planning to be sort of recruiting, you know, very much to similar volumes that you would have done in recent years, despite the corona crisis?
That's it. We're sort of exactly the same recruitment for us. We're still sort of running vacation schemes. We've just run a sort of very successful virtual summer vacation scheme, and we've sort of known, and we've got confidence behind us now from that scheme, from events that we have run, is we know that students still benefit from these virtual events. The feedback's been absolutely brilliant. So we're looking forward to sort of just moving these sort of what were physical events onto the more virtual platforms. But yeah, our recruitment will sort of remain as it is, as it historically has been.
Is there anything that makes you slightly nervous about the shift to virtual, i.e. possibly lack of face-to-face, or maybe too many students to interact with? I spoke to some employers who are a bit worried that they're going to get so swamped by applications, particularly if they're still recruiting in a market where other employers may not be.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely something that's in the back of my mind, and it's obviously absolutely brilliant to get lots of different student interest, and I think students are going to have sort of really positive opportunity, because there are going to be so many different virtual events for them to choose from. But yeah, it is making sure that we've got enough representatives who we can sort of actively then be speaking to all of the students, and we're really sort of thinking about sort of how we can streamline our sort of key points that we want to get across to different individuals. But yes, we've got very supportive business behind us, so I know we're going to be very, very busy as a team, because we want to get involved in as much as we can to answer all of the brilliant questions that come through to us. But yeah, I think there'll be lots of students at every event that we're attending.
Yes, I think. Joanne, just turning to yourself, just before asking about your experiences, I mean, are you, as in your organisation, are you still actively recruiting at the moment? I mean, has coronavirus had an impact on your resourcing plans?
Absolutely. So I guess the one thing is we found that a lot of graduates now need maybe more reassurance. Like, it's a big change for any student coming out of university into the world of employment. So, you know, whenever COVID-19 struck, I guess there was a time where we didn't know what was going to happen in the recruitment process. But with the companies that we deal with, I suppose it's in their nature to be very adaptable in change and adjust and thrive in times of change. So I'm pleased to say that our recruitment, similar to Gemma, there is business as usual. And perhaps I would say that companies now, maybe more than ever, need these students that are coming out, graduates that are coming out of university, that are skilled and motivated and able to help them adapt in this current economic situation.
That's good to hear. Yes, I mean, one of the messages we're keen to get out there is that despite all the difficult headlines, because it is a difficult market, is there still a little bit of recruitment going on, isn't there? And, a financial crash, and lots of students just kind of exited the market. Actually, they just didn't think any recruitment was happening at all. Whereas it's good to hear that from both of you, actually, that there's still a lot of that activity going on.
Yeah.
So, what are your experiences so far, Joanna? Taking part in virtual activity.
Yeah, so I took part in Grad Ireland Grad Fest in the start of June was our first grad fair, and again, similar before COVID-19 happened, I hadn't really partaken in any webinars or anything virtual like this before, so I was quite a newbie to it. So I guess prior to it, I was a bit nervous on how we were going to set it up, but I have to say Alison and Piers in Grad Ireland were fantastic help from the start. They were able to give us the dynamic of what we needed to set up our booth and how to set it up, what sort of images, logos, what would be useful on it. So we were able to set up our booth prior to it, have a blurb about career boosts, have our pictures of the staff on it, because again, you want to have as much interaction with the people that are coming on. You want a face there rather than just the text on it. So I find trying to personalize it to our company, what we represent and what we hope for the students and graduates there. So getting that all done ahead of time definitely helped set the scene for it, like, our virtual stall essentially on it. At the fair itself, I think it was an excellent opportunity. Whenever we went on, you were able to see what graduates and students were on the page already interacting and the engagement levels that were on it, which was great to see the high levels of engagement. I think one of the most surprising things I suppose I hadn't really thought of prior to the fair was that as it's like a virtual fair, you were able to connect with people across the whole island, whereas maybe previous fairs, they're quite localized. So with Career Boost, that was a big benefit for us, because obviously we have jobs across the whole island, north and south. So it was great that at this fair, we were seeing people from Cork, Donegal, Derry, a whole range of people, and we could see what their degrees were. So by seeing that, we were able to see who was relevant, that we were able to target as well. So not only were you sitting waiting for someone to come and engage with you, you were able to go and speak to other people as well, which I thought was a great touch on it. Again, we were able to do the video conference on it. So not only could you do your sort of texting to them on and off it, but if a student wanted to talk to you face to face, we had that option as well, which was brilliant on it. So I find it really enjoyable and definitely very worthwhile.
It's interesting talking to some employers that I know that maybe don't have so much experience of doing virtual events yet. One of the things they've said when they're talking about fairs is a slight nervousness, actually, that I guess the walk-by candidates, the people that may never have heard of your employer brand, you know, that they just happen to stop by, and that kind of, I guess, ad hoc type of recruitment that can, you know, grow into really good hires. Is that something you've still been able to experience through a virtual platform?
Yes, absolutely, because I suppose for the students during this time, it is a very nervous time for them and graduates coming out not knowing what the world of employment's looking like at the moment, and maybe thinking our employers reluctant in hiring staff, whereas we're able to give that reassurance. Like, you know, I've been able to talk to different students, graduates coming through here, and sort of talk to them about even just the climate that they're coming into at the moment, regardless of it. As well as that, we're able to show them on your booth, we're able to show the live jobs that we have, so they're able to see what we have and other opportunities that are out there. Whereas sometimes when you're at the live fair, you have large groups, you don't have that one-to-one conversation with them. So I think with the virtual fair, it's given the best of both worlds.
Great. Thanks, Joanne. Gavan, can I just turn to you? I mean, apart from the obvious differences between a virtual and a face-to-face experience, what are the main differences in those in actually how the experience might work, how the platform works in practice?
Sure. I suppose the main difference is really the obvious one, which is the mechanism, you know, by which companies and interested students actually interact and they engage with each other. You know, I suppose when we take all of our experiences in being a part of face-to-face events, you know, the physical interaction between both parties, you know, being able to have free-flowing, friendly conversations in person is, you know, is a huge benefit. You're also kind of reading the more subtle signals, such as facial expressions and body language, are also much harder in that virtual setting. You know, so I suppose for us in our virtual fair or our face-to-face events in, you know, in Ireland, we put a huge emphasis on the student experience. We've encouraged our clients to really consider how they market themselves on the day, how they differentiate their stand, how they engage with attendees, and, you know, along with all of the other fair elements such as the CV clinics, the seminars, chill out areas and fun activities, makes it a really engaging experience for the students. Moving to a virtual fair, you know, really presented us with the challenge as to how we try and deliver the same experience in a virtual setting. You know, virtual fairs obviously don't provide for the same level of physical interaction, but, you know, like all of us, you know, right now, we're all starting to adjust to having meaningful conversations by video call and also chat. So we found, you know, for the fair that Joanne and the Career Boost team were a part of last week, the engagement, or last month rather, the engagement levels are really high. And part of that was because we had to bring students on a journey to explain why they should attend the virtual fair and what they would gain from it. There's lots of benefits, as you know, as we've discussed already, in terms of the students, you know, because in terms of efficiency and talking to and engaging with more employers, because it's easier for them to log on to a fair compared to perhaps traveling to a physical event. From the employer's perspective, though, it can be far more time consuming in advance of the virtual fair compared to a face-to-face. Like if you think about all of our experiences in attending face-to-face events, it normally would require a confirmation with the event organizer, looking after the logistics, sourcing the merchandise to give to students on the day, and then for planning to attend the event on the day itself. Then it's just a case of really kind of getting ready, getting the game face on, getting ready to engage with all of the students, answer their questions in person, and really being in a position to kind of sell your brand, your organization, your graduate program offering. You know, the virtual fair takes much more time in advance, and particularly in terms of planning and what you're going to say about yourself on the day. As Joanne said, you know, the platform and the fair provider that you engage with is also really important, because there'll be varying kind of degrees of kind of functionality engagement that they provide. So I suppose it's really important for any virtual fair that you're going to participate in, for you as an exhibitor or as an employer, to really understand how to best use that platform. So a lot of the providers that we know would have their own how-to guides on how to access, use and gain the most from their platform. They should have and should be able to send you hints and tips of how to best to maximize your booth, all of which will lead to a better experience for you and more engagement from the students. I think this is really the single biggest piece of advice that we would give to anybody who's going to be a part of of a virtual fair is to really spend time learning about the platform, what it can do, fully understand how it works, as I said, what it can do, how you access it, how you upload all of your content, how do your teams, engage, what do they need to do in advance of the virtual doors being opened on the fair itself, how do they respond to students, and also how do they deal with technical problems. The virtual fair environment is new to us all. It's new to us in Grad Ireland, it's new to our clients, but it's also new to students, and it does require more time in advance, particularly from the employer perspective, to really give a lot of thought to your to your employer content, to your videos, your immediate vacancies, and also to arrange for your team to be on hand to meet and chat with students. As Joanne said, you also need to really consider, how do you make your booth as engaging as possible in order for students to stay and engage with you? Again, think about our experiences, our collective experiences of being a part of a face-to-face events. Students will walk the hall, they'll have numerous conversations with various employers, but in a virtual environment, you obviously can't see that happening. So what you need to do is you need to give them a reason to come back to your booth and to engage with your team. So therefore, the more engaging content that you have within your booth, the more likely students are to engage with you. So I suppose we know that different platforms will have different ways for you to do this. Some have ways for students to leave an appointment card. Others have ways for you as an employer or as an exhibitor to search the attendees and to research and reach out to more candidates that ordinarily you probably wouldn't get to meet in a face-to-face. You can have opportunities to arrange a time for the students to come back to you and talk to you at a time that's convenient for both you and them. And other platforms have various different functionalities, such as video and chat functions. So I suppose how you engage with students virtually will and can change dependent on which platform provider that you work with. But it does take probably more time than most would actually consider, particularly in that their face-to-face experience is one that we all have a frame of reference to. We know what it's like to attend an event and what we need to do in advance of that event. The virtual environment is a different type of planning.
Yes, and that's something that came from the university webinar that we did last week, that yes, not to be deluded that actually it's just, it's easier almost because it's virtual rather than I mean, I've got enough grey hairs to remember doing careers fairs where basically once you got the logistics sorted, you just went on the road and you rocked up and you got a horse very quickly talking to students.
Well, that's what Alex actually said to us last week. And one of their biggest headaches was actually, where can they source all of the swag that they bring to the event itself, and what do they how are they going to deliver the same type of engagement in a virtual environment?
Well, but talk about the swag. So actually, probably a good act. Well, there'll be a bit less stuff going into landfill from all their sort of plastic pens and things. Alex, just turning to yourself, there'll be people tuning into this webinar that have had no experience of virtual fairs at all. They'll just they'll know the sort of as a buzzword, but very little understanding about how they actually work. And I suppose whereas something like Grad Ireland is much more generic across all sectors, you'll be focusing on the legal sector. But how do virtual fairs actually work in practice?
Yes, so I think, as Gavin was explaining, a big part of it is what happens before the actual virtual fair takes place. The planning is really important, and we do onboarding sessions with the participants. And I mean, there's different ways to handle onboarding. You can kind of do in person or with virtual sessions, or you can send them instructions, but it's figuring out a system that puts everyone through. So by the time that the fair actually starts, or whatever type of virtual event it is starts, the participants are fluent in it. And then, I mean, the fairs themselves, I mean, there's in some ways that, I mean, they're not completely different to a physical fair. In the sense, you've got a virtual expo hall and you've got a bunch of different booths, and the students you can go around the hall and they go into whatever booth of whatever firm that they're interested in, and then they interact with the firms in various different ways, whether that's group video chats, or whether it's text, sort of live written chats, or one-on-one video chats. It's quite interesting in terms of the etiquette is actually quite similar to physical events in the sense that it's very much led by the firms and led by the graduate recruiters. The students obviously are kind of on their best behavior like they would be in a regular networking situation, and they'll ask their questions and they'll get their responses. And I think the other aspect of it is, well, okay, so some of those aspects are quite similar to physical events, but other aspects you're able to provide things that you wouldn't be able to do on a physical event. So with Legal Cheek, it's been, we've got a big careers section, we've got profiles of various firms, we've got a big resource there, and many of the firms do too. I mean, they've got on their graduate recruitment websites, there's some really good stuff on those websites, and rather than hand them a trinket as you would at a physical fair, you can virtually hand them a link to go and to look at a particular article that the firm might have prepared or particular resource, and I think that's quite useful in a way that didn't really happen at physical fairs. I mean, you could obviously guide them on their phones previously, but so that's quite an interesting aspect of it. And I think you've got to, timing wise, you've got to be mindful of that. We've heard a lot about Zoom fatigue, and I think obviously applies to all kind of video conferencing and anything where that is the basis of the event. And so whereas you might get a careers fair that is all day, I think you've got to think quite carefully about how you structure your fairs, because I think people they need more of a break when they're on a virtual platform, perhaps have lower attention spans, and you've obviously got ways for the firms to kind of follow up with the students. There's different ways for them to do that, and I think the other important thing about the way the fairs work is the numbers, because being virtual events, they can be very, very big, or they can be very, very small and targeted, and it really does work for both ways. So at the one end of the spectrum, we did a virtual VAC scheme, which was a kind of a series of virtual events and case study exercises and fair style networking situations, which ran over the course of a week. We did that 4,500 students, and so that's very different to an event which would be, say, we have a network for science students that are interested in law, for example, STEM Future Lawyers, and with that, some of those events are like 50 students, very selective, and obviously the firms and the employers are engaging with the students in a very different way depending on the size, and that goes back to Gavin's point about thinking through so much. What do the firms want to get out of this? What do the employers want to get out of this? How are you going to manage that with that number of students? So it's not only do you have to get everyone onboarded and make sure they're fluent in the platform, but also thinking, okay, how are the numbers going to be? Are they going to split? Do we have enough for them? Will that be too much? And so there's, it's a new genre, isn't it? It's a new genre of event. There's a lot of ways doing it, and we're right at the beginning of it, really. And we're at the moment it does require a lot of careful thought, and it always goes down to that objective. What are the employers' objectives out of this event?
I mean, from a practical level, the employer experience. I mean, if you go back to a face-to-face, yes, there's the travel involved, but you're going to be on a stand 10 till 4, grab yourself a sandwich if you can at lunchtime. If you'll just talk to people who come at you. I mean, is it the same time frame, or do virtual fairs tend to plan to do them a bit shorter? I'm just interested in what that employer experience is. They're going to be sat at their desk, I guess, at a laptop. Do they still want teams of people online, or is it more spread out over a sort of a longer period of days?
It's interesting the time, because actually we've just we're organising we've got a Hong Kong virtual law fair taking place in September, and that at the moment there's been another outbreak of COVID-19 in Hong Kong, and that means that the physical fair there has been cancelled, and so we've been liaising with a lot of firms around that. There's been a lot of interest in that, and one of the conversations, because we've been talking to the universities as well, and one of the conversations is about timing, because you've got traditionally the Hong Kong Law Fair took place on a Saturday, whereas that actually the law firms in Hong Kong have actually wanted to move that from a Saturday for quite some time now, and it's just kind of rolled over and it's been on a Saturday. Now the universities have had it on a Saturday because so it avoids the teaching, but actually, you know, through liaising with everyone, we managed to find out a time when actually we're running it 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. Hong Kong time, which that doesn't clash with the main university law school classes. It doesn't eat too much into the lawyer and graduate recruitment team's evenings, and it doesn't affect the weekend. So and 3 hours we find is a good stretch of time. Now you can have people kind of subbing in and out during that 3 hour period. That's fine, as long as they all get an onboarding session ahead of the fair, so that they're fluent in the platform. That's fine. And so in a sense, I think what you might find for quite a few virtual events and fairs is organizations will have, you know, things will have been done just that way just because they have for years and years, and you kind of, what you've got at the moment is a kind of bit of a reset, and everyone re-looking at stuff and thinking, well, actually, what do we want out of it? When are the actual best times to do this? And that's probably going to go and flow into a physical fairs and physical events once this obviously once the pandemic's over.
Okay. Gavan, can I just, we talked quite a bit about the employer experience. One of the things Alex was touching on there, and you there as well, is that student experience. And I wonder what the student experience is like. I mean, are they just faced with a whole plethora of different options? It must be quite hard for a student to navigate through when you've got you know, so many employers and different options, just the same as you would in a face-to-face there.
Yeah, that's true, and I suppose this is a new experience for, you know, for all students. That, you know, certainly, and from our experience in Ireland, you know, we're in a position to see students engaging with employers and, you know, in person. So this is, you know, this is a new process for them and also us. But I suppose the positive student experience really is kind of predicated and built upon the platform and what it can provide, in addition to what, you know, what Gemma and Joanne also mentioned earlier on, which is about, you know, the efforts that each of the employers make in terms of the preparation for their booths, and what part they play within the virtual fair. So I suppose it's really important, for a piece of advice that we would give, it's really important for, you know, for all employers, anybody that's going to participate in what is a marketing exercise, an outreach exercise to students, to reflect your personality, you know, your culture, the opportunities, and in everything that you do. It's really a case of kind of putting your best foot forward, because I think the more that you're in a position to provide, the better the student, you know, the better experience for the student. You know, you really have to make it interesting, and, you know, the more that you do of this, the better level of interest and engagement that you'll have with students, and, you know, ergo, you're going to have a better experience from students, and better feedback, because there will be more for them, you know, to have done. So I suppose, you know, when you look at the pre-event planning for any exhibitors, students need to be brought on a very similar journey. They need to obviously know about the fair, why they should attend. They need to be given very clear reasons as to why they should attend, what they can expect to see and experience and learn on the day, who they'll be able to meet, and how they should obviously log into the fair. You know, the positive student experience, as I said, it really, really does depend on the content that's part of the overall virtual event. So that, you know, in our case was the seminars, the live talks, the presentations, the CV clinics, the advisory content, and also, you know, the number of employers, you know, because, you know, the more employers there are, the more opportunities there are for them to engage, the more reasons there are for them to attend, the more that they will actually learn. This is what really makes it interesting for them, and to give them more reasons to attend. I suppose from the employer perspective as well, which will kind of lean into why or how students will get a positive experience, is really consider what effort would you put into your face-to-face, as Alex mentioned, what effort would you make in terms of your face-to-face planning, you know, and what you can do, or what you have done in a face-to-face event, how much of that you can actually migrate to the platform that you're going to use, and the event that you're going to attend is ultimately going to give you a better experience, not only as an exhibitor, but also provide a better experience for the students. You know, this one of the things that we'd also heard over the last while is that students may believe that they can access all of the information about you online. So there's an element of truth in that, but I suppose it's really for the exhibitors and the employers to give it a lot of thought and a lot of planning to, explore, all the aspects of the platform and understand its functionality, understand everything that it can provide, and ultimately by providing as much content as you possibly can that platform can provide is going to represent you in a much stronger way, and ultimately give a much better experience for students. On our side, our student feedback was really positive, but like all good events, it was the amount of support and pre-event work that we put in before the Career Discovery Week that gave us the good result that we got.
Thanks, Kevin. So Joanne, can I turn to you as an employer who actually has been through sort of the virtual fair experience? Will you echo what Gavan and Alex have said about that need for preparation? I mean, was there much more that you had to do in advance of a virtual fair as opposed to, I guess, a normal face-to-face experience?
Absolutely. I think, it's already mentioned that because you don't have the convenience of being able to see people coming in and making that sort of face-to-face meeting with them is how you attract them into your booth initially. That's going to get that engagement up. So firstly, I think the first thing we done on ours for the grad fair was our booth, making sure we had all our live jobs up. First of all these graduates are coming in because they want a job. So this is the first thing we done, made sure all our jobs were live there that would hopefully entice them to talk to us about it. Making sure that we had a description about what Career Boost is. Obviously, we're a niche in science, technology and engineering graduates, so we want to make sure that we were attracting the right students in to speak to us about that. And again, making sure they're saying there that during the virtual fairs, you have a large number of people coming through them. So in preparation for it, we were able to have sort of frequently asked questions, maybe a little piece text ready, because obviously the first part of engagement was someone typing a message into you and you're going to be repeating yourself a lot in it. So I think having some messages pre-prepared helped you, that you might be talking to 3, 4, 5 people all at one time, that this sped the process up for you to make sure you were giving them consistent information about your program. So we had that in advance of it, in case, some people wanted to talk to you face to face. Others were probably sitting in their pajamas at home with their cup of tea and didn't want you to see them. So they were just happy with the text option of it. And again, we had to make sure that we had enough staff there that were familiar with the portal. So we were all there, because obviously we weren't going to be all able to sit on this all day with all the bits coming in. So we made sure we rotated it, and at busier times of the day, we were able to have more staff on to make sure that we were all speaking to people in a timely manner. And I suppose ahead of the fair, we made sure that we were familiar with the platform. As Gavin's already said, different platforms have different options. We made sure we knew how to use the video call option on it, how to respond to messages, how to view who was already on the platform, and again, how to sort of make appointments if we weren't available there and then to talk to people, to make sure it was a seamless process for everyone, because I suppose graduates, employers, everyone's in this together at the moment, that it is a completely different experience to what we're used to. So we want to make sure this is enjoyable for everybody.
So just a bit of context, you talked about having a number of your team staff lined up. Sort of how many people would you have involved in the virtual fair?
In Career, well, there's 4 of us that day ready to go on throughout the days of it. In Career Boost, we have a team there that we were all familiar with it and all know the program. So essentially people that might not usually come on and deal with the recruitment go out on the day. Whenever we're going down to the different fairs, usually it might not be the usual people, but we're all familiar with it and we were all ready to go on as and when needed.
And was there, you mentioned some follow, I guess after a normal face-to-face fair, the follow-on is encouraging applications. You might, I would have thought the driver's applications. Is that the same with the virtual fair, or is it different? Does the kind of, I guess, the tail of the event mean you have to think about things differently about how you follow with students?
Yes, well, I think initially my sort of feel of it was there's students there that need sort of reassurance in what's going on, maybe in 6 months down the line. There might have been graduates there could have been students maybe in their final year who are quite anxious as what's happening. So Ideally, we wanted to make sure that firstly that people understood what Career Boost was all about, what we had to offer for them, and how we, in Career Boost, we have jobs offered throughout the year. So while there's certain drives, we would have jobs advertised 12 months of the year on our website. So it's given reassurance in that. Again, with the portal, we were able to see how many people viewed our jobs and how many people actually applied. So that's always a bonus to see that, you know, for levels of success, that yes, we were reaching the right audience and that people were engaging with us on it. So obviously, yes, we want to see that. But again, in these times, I think, you know, part of it is making sure students and graduates are reassured that while this is a difficult time for them coming out of university, that they matter and how they're feeling is just as important in this time.
Thanks, Joanna. Gemma, just turning to yourself, again, we talk about the employer side of things. From a student perspective, is there anything that you're thinking about how you might have to interact differently with students during sort of a virtual fair, or do you think it'd be pretty much the same, just a different platform?
Yeah, no, I mean, as we've sort of been discussing, there are the similarities, there are the differences as well on these virtual platforms. And I think when it comes to sort of the more virtual fair, it's still going to be the same sort of more focus around questions that prospective candidates are asking and the responses that our firm representatives are giving. So it's still going to be that key form of interaction in the virtual fair setting. And obviously we're going to have our key messages, and I know Joanne was talking about having text responses ready, because different candidates, different students are going to prefer the different methods of interaction that the platforms will offer. So it's just making sure that sort of all of our representatives are sort of fully confident and clear in getting across those key messages on those platforms. But it's also, I think, a big focus will be on students being prepared with their questions to sort of be able to jump in and ask the key things, get the information from the employers that they want to know. And I know we've been discussing sort of they'll vary in how long the different events are. So it could be that conversations go round and round in circles every hour or so, as different students are in the booths at the different times. So it's really thinking in advance what key questions you want to ask, and there'll be a lot that the students will benefit as well just from listening to the different conversations that are going on, and that will suit some people just sort of collecting all of that information in. But it's just sort of really making sure that questions are being targeted at the right representatives to make sure that the conversation is flowing, and then our representatives will be able to sort of interact in the best way there. And one thing that's sort of going to be key in all interactions that happen is our reps are going to really make sure that people are sort of getting as much as they can a true sense of sort of the culture of the firm, sort of trying to share their real life stories, because that's one thing when you're having those face-to-face interactions, when candidates are able to come into the office, is they do get that sort of feel of who we are as a firm, that sort of culture, the bars of the different sort of nationalities we have, the sort of sense of diversity. So it's going to sort of make sure that in our interactions we're able to get that side of the firm across as well. And then, yeah, I think it's also worth a mention of that follow-up piece that we've been discussing as well. That will be in the back of our sort of minds when we're having these interactions with students. So it's yeah, a lot for us to think about, but it's still, we want to get that really positive, meaningful engagement with people who are coming to talk to us. We sort of want as many people to come along, answer all of your questions, and it's just sort of that positive, meaningful engagement.
One of the questions I've had through actually is on the student piece, and it's saying that actually the question is, as an employer, are you expecting to have a more diverse pool of students to talk to, both from different locations? Joanna's already mentioned, you know, the advantage of the platform being able to go across the whole island. Is that something you're geared up? So there's diversity by location, but also diversity from maybe different institutions you might have targeted otherwise. Students, I know a university spoke to me about this last week, and they have students who might be put off a bit by face-to-face fairs because they might be a little bit more introverted, say. So yeah, so the question is saying, are you gearing up for more diverse students actually that you might come across by using a virtual platform?
Yeah, no, we definitely are, and that's something that we've sort of really focused our efforts on, is sort of making sure that there's sort of open access to the profession across sort of a broad range of different backgrounds, and that's sort of something that's really important to us. And one thing that we're going to have in the back of our minds is, obviously, as we were saying, it's sort of some people just really do not like these virtual methods, and if it wasn't for COVID-19, people just wouldn't choose to go to these virtual platforms. It probably terrifies some people. So it's making sure that we sort of have an offering on these virtual platforms, whether it's text information, and depending on what they offer, that we can sort of give those individuals the information that they need. And I think the follow-up will be sort of more important to them, where it's more personalised and targeted to those individuals. But no, I think it will be absolutely brilliant, and such a positive of these is that you're not sort of limited to just one university. It is sort of getting that really good mix of different students sort of in your booth at the same time, and it's just, we're going to sort of make sure that we get sort of very diverse group of individuals from the firm, because there's no sort of type of person who we recruit. Everyone's got their own story, sort of their own background. So it's making sure that we get sort of a good mix of people as well, to sort of share all different stories with the candidates as well.
Just picking up on that point, if I can, Stephen, it was I think that is one of the most positive aspects of virtual events, the fact that you can reach so many more students who firms might not previously have been able to reach. And we did an event with White & Case with Gemma in April, and that was that was just for White & Case, a themed event. And so we capped it at 500 students, and we had over 150 different universities represented at the event. Many universities where for students who wouldn't have travelled if that event had been in London, as we've done previously pphysical events with White & Case, where you do get quite a few students that travel, but inevitably the focus is on the southeast, whereas that we were getting students attending, students asking questions, and there's some nice connections that took place. Like, so we had a panel session there, and we had a lawyer who was based in New York, a lawyer based in Paris, and a lawyer based in London, which was a nice way to communicate the international nature of the firm. One of the question askers in that panel discussion was from the University of Aberdeen, who wouldn't have normally attended a London event. And it just so happened that the partner in New York on the panel had studied at the University of Aberdeen. So they were able to have a kind of nice little chat. And that was kind of, it was like real kind of, you know, that was the sort of kind of connection and interaction that wouldn't have happened before. And I think they're the kind of sweet spots where, you know, you need to be looking and thinking, what that's great. How can we do that? What other areas where you couldn't replicate in the same way in a physical event? And because there's many of those those kind of possibilities that can be explored. Because as I said, I think, you know, we're only at the beginning of this, and there's a huge potential there.
Which is something you touched on, actually. It's a question I was also going to ask. I'll put that to you, Gavin, I think, next. We've talked about virtual fairs, and what Alex was describing, that what I would describe sounds a bit more like, you know, almost like an evening presentation you might do, employer specific. I mean, Gavin, do you think it's not just going to be about virtual fairs? There's going to be a whole range of other different virtual ways to interact as we just kind of, you know, explore, you know, different ways of working. Innovation comes down the line.
Yeah, very much so. I suppose, you know, go back to, you know, to all of the points that I think we've all touched on during the course of this webinar, is that we are in uncharted territory. You know, this is new for all of us. It's new for us as an event organizer. It's new for our, you know, our clients and exhibitors. You know, as Joanne is one of our clients in Ireland, but it's also new for students. And I think it's you know, in our case, we had to make a pivot from a face-to-face event that we were planning in June, that we've always held in June, and our graduate careers fair is the largest graduate careers fair or graduate careers event in October, which has normally in excess of 120 exhibitors and 9,000 students in attendance. You know, we now have the challenge of how do we actually deliver that in a virtual setting. If you'd asked me, you know, 6 months ago, would we ever find ourselves in this position whereby we'd have to pivot this quickly and innovate this quickly, I probably would have. Well, I certainly have more grey hairs now than I did 6 months ago. But, you know, in saying that, I think everybody is learning. Everybody is having to change and innovate. And I just on 2 points that, you know, perhaps were made earlier on, just to flesh out a little bit more detail. I think there is a misconception that from an exhibitor's perspective that you need to be logged in and sitting at a laptop waiting to talk to students from 9 o'clock in the morning until 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That's not the case. Many of the new elements that form part of the platforms allow for scheduling of time to engage with an exhibitor or engage with a member of staff or a representative of an organization. So that means that the engagement from the student to the employer within their booth doesn't stop just because you're not there at that moment in time to answer any questions. They can leave appointment cards, they can ask questions, and ultimately then the employer or the exhibitor, the person that's managing that booth, can come back to those those questions or those appointments or anything that has been raised in the time when you haven't been available to meet them at that moment in time at a later point. So I think that's really important to stress, that it doesn't require you to be in sitting at a laptop waiting to have conversations. They can all be scheduled and managed at a time that works for you, but also the student. And I think the other point that Gemma made is a very important one, which is, when you consider, particularly from Grad Ireland's perspective, what it is we've always encouraged, like Joanne and all of our other clients, is consider what you're going to do on the day. Who is it that you're going to bring to your stand? Who is it you're going to have on your stand? Who best embodies your culture, your personality, your opportunities? And we often say to our clients that the best person to market your graduate program is on your payroll. Students want to talk to other students. They don't necessarily want to talk to a mid-40s grey-haired guy like me. They do want to be in a position to learn from others. What have their experiences been? This shouldn't be any different. Just because it's in a virtual setting, you can still have representatives that can talk about the organisation, the graduate programme, the opportunities, but it should also allow them to learn from others that have gone through that process before. So I'd really encourage those that are planning for their careers fair activities during the autumn, consider who is going to answer the questions in relation to the graduate programme, the applications, the onboarding, the structure of the graduate programme, but also those that were in a position to say, from a student to peer-to-peer perspective, what was your experience? What was the application process like? What's it really like to work with this company? Why should I come and work for you? I think that's probably the next step of considering and planning for the careers fair, that it shouldn't just be your HR or your recruitment or your onboarding team. It should also be the people, the graduates, the students that are currently working for your organization, as Gemma mentioned. I think would be a really strong addition to an employer's booth, along with all of the other peripheral elements, such as your videos, your jobs, your culture, your activities, your CSR activities, all of those really good points that encapsulate why your organization is as good as it is. And it's really then working with that platform provider to ensure that all of that content, as best as you possibly can be represented within your booth, and obviously represent your brand and your graduate program as strongly as you possibly can. Yeah,
students still want to know, the kind of people they will be working with, the kind of culture they're joining, which is the graduate. And I guess that's always been the case to a certain extent. I had another question through, and Joanne, I thought I'd ask this of you, and it's about actually thinking beyond just this autumn. Having experienced it virtually, obviously you talked about still the effort that needs to go into it, but I'm guessing that actually there are savings around time. People having to travel, a lot of logistical savings. Do you think that, assuming that we do go back to normal, that this is something will stick? Do you think that actually you'll be doing more virtually online even when face-to-face becomes possible again?
I think there'll be elements, hopefully, of both I would like to see, because obviously whenever we are able to travel to fairs, we can't go to every fair across the country as much as we would love to. It just isn't feasible to be out of the office that much. So it would be great to see options of virtual fairs as well. So we could possibly alternate years, in which years we're actually down face-to-face with graduates, and the ones that we're not able to go face-to-face to, it would be great to have the option to have a virtual fair as well on it. Because I think there is a lot of learning for everyone in this. As Gavan said, 6 months ago, if you told me that webinars would have been a sort of weekly thing for me in my job, I think I would have scoffed at it and thought, no, like the amount of meetings we're used to having face-to-face, whereas now we're having meetings with people down in Dublin, Belfast, and it is just simply turning on the computer rather than traveling to these meetings. So it's amazing how adaptable we are, and I think there is a lot of learning to come from it.
And I think you mentioned this before, the data side of things. I had a question about data. I mean, do you just get a lot more data now that you can use? Because you've got people's details from when they log in. You mentioned the subjects earlier on this webinar. So is that a big advantage of this type of event?
Yes, there's live data that we were able to get on the platform on the day, telling you the numbers of people on, who they were, where they were from, and what degrees they had studied, which was great initially to start engaging ourselves. Like, we were able to be proactive rather than waiting for them to come to us. We were able to introduce ourselves as well. Also on the day, we were able to see how the numbers were rising in terms of applications that were viewed and potentially submitted as well. So that was great to have live. Like, usually after these fairs, we might see an increase in them, but to see it specifically, this is due to this fair, it's great to have it there and then.
Gemma, I've got a question for you, and it's probably a bit tricky one to answer, so tell me if you want to pass it. It's about budget. And I think this has come from university, actually, because I do hear this conversation happening a lot in universities. I mean, obviously, we've heard from both Gavan and Alex, you know, there's effort that goes into doing these things. It's not an easy thing to put on. Platforms cost time, and so there is a fee to take part in events. As an employer, I'm hearing that marketing attraction budgets are under pressure. So is this something you look at very closely, the ROI of virtual events, and think very carefully about? I'm not going to ask you how much you would pay, that would be unfair. But is it something that cost pressures are a reality when it comes to these events, and there isn't an unlimited budget for them?
Yeah, I think it's anything that we are sort of running in our graduate resourcing processes. I mean, we always need to look at it sort of sensibly. We need to consider ROI, because ultimately there's no point in spending money and pushing sort of funds from your budget into an area that's actually not giving us any return on that investment. So it's definitely something that does need to be considered and need to be looked at. I think at the moment, because all of the sort of virtual events, the virtual milk round, it is also new. It's an area that we'll sort of need to sort of look at everything in closer detail, sort of come next year, come the end of our application cycle, if we have sort of had this more virtual sort of presence over the rest of our recruiting year, and sort of look at it, how it all pans out next year. But obviously, I mean, we sort of a focus physically, whether it's virtually as well, has been sort of that university level engagement, been with different sort of diversity organisations that we work with, different sort of advertising channels. So from the perspective of sort of events that we've done historically and ROI that we've had from them, we sort of know how that sits and know sort of areas of success and what works for us. So it will be really interesting to see how that translates across into sort of the more virtual platforms. And I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with our application numbers next year. We've just sort of closed our training contract application window recently. There was an increase in numbers there, which I was expecting, but no, I'm excited to see what happens over the next few months.
Fantastic. And we're on the hour, so I think that's time to wrap it up on that very positive note. I think, yes, there's going to be a very exciting autumn, and we're going to be doing things very differently. I think it's going to be fascinating to see how much of this sort of sticks 12 months down the line. I suspect that a lot of the sort of the logistical savings and we talked about data, we talked about all these different ways of interacting with a much broader range of students. Yeah, I think we'll end up with a very much blended approach. That would be my forecast. So all that remains left for me to say, we can only give you a virtual handshake, I'm afraid. But to Joanne, Gemma, Alex and Gavan, thank you very much. They've been really useful insights, and we've had plenty of activity sort of on the questions box. So thank you very much. As I said at the start, you will get a link to the recording of this, so if you want to revisit some of the things we talked about, you can do that, and also feel free to share the link to other people, maybe in your teams or peers in other organisations you would find it useful. And please also go to have a look at our library on our YouTube channel, also our podcast library. We've touched on some of the other subjects. We talked a little bit about internships, and we've got a whole range of other materials that go into some of the other areas that everybody's thinking about and working on at the moment. So final thank you to our panel. That's really great insights. Thank you very much. And hopefully we'll meet for a beer soon, maybe by the end of the year, and be able to say thank you in person.
Sounds
Enjoy
good.
the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.